Perhaps the greatest difference between dramatic performances in Shakespeare's time and ours was that in Shakespeare's England the roles of women were played by boys. Some of these boys grew up to take male roles in their maturity. There were no women in the acting companies, only in the audience. It had not always been so in the history of the English stage. There are records of women on English stages in the 13th and 14th centuries, 200 years before Shakespeare's plays were performed. After the accession of James I in 1603, the Queen of England and her ladies took part in entertainments at court called masques. And with the reopening of the theatres in 1660 at the restoration of Charles II, women again took their place on the public stage. The chief competitors for the companies of adult actors such as the one to which Shakespeare belonged and for which he wrote were companies of exclusively boy actors. The competition was most intense in the early 1600s. There were then two principal children's companies: the Children of Paul's, the choir boys from St. Paul's Cathedral, whose private playhouse was near the cathedral, and the Children of the Chapel Royal, the choir boys from the monarch's private chapel, who performed at the Blackfriars Theatre built by Burbage in 1596, which Shakespeare's company had been stopped from using by local residents who objected to crowds. In Hamlet, Shakespeare writers of an eerie nest of children, little eyases, hawks, not that cry out on the top of top of question and are most tyrannically clapped for it. These are now the fashion, and berattle the common stages, attack the public theaters. In the long run, the adult actors prevailed. The Children of Paul's dissolved around 1606. By around 1608, the Children of the Chapel Royal had been forced to stop playing at the Blackfriars Theatre, which was then taken over by the King's Company of Players, Shakespeare's own troupe. Acting companies and theaters of Shakespeare's time were organized in different ways. For example, Philip Henslowe owned the Rose and leased it to companies of actors who paid him for their takings. Henslowe would act as manager of these companies, initially paying playwrights for their plays and buying properties, recovering his outlay from the actors. With the building of the Globe, Shakespeare's company, however, managed itself with the principal actors, Shakespeare among them, having the status of sharers and the right to a share in the takings as well as the responsibility for a part of the expenses. 5 of the sharers, including Shakespeare, owned the Globe. As actor, as sharer in an acting company, and in ownership of theaters, and as playwright, Shakespeare was about as involved in the theatrical industry as one could imagine. Although Shakespeare and his fellows prospered, their status under the law was conditional upon the protection of powerful patrons. Common players, those who did not have patrons or masters, were classed in the language of the law with vagabonds and sturdy beggars. So the actors had to secure for themselves the official rank of servants of patrons. Among the patrons under whose protection Shakespeare's company worked were the Lord Chamberlain and, after the accession of King James in 1603, the King himself. We are now perhaps on the verge of learning a great deal more about the theaters in which Shakespeare and his contemporaries performed, or at least of opening up new questions about them. Already about 70% of the Rose has been excavated, as has about 10% of the Second Globe, the one built in 1614. It is to be hoped that soon more will be available for study. These are the exciting times for students of Shakespeare's stage.